The word freeloader landed harder than I expected. Not because it was shouted, not because it surprised me, but because my mother said it smiling. She was holding a champagne flute in one hand, the microphone in the other, standing beneath a banner that read, 40 Years of Love. The room was filled with relatives, neighbors, church friends, coworkers, people who'd watched me grow up, people who thought they knew me. And of course, my mother continued lightly, laughter already dancing in her voice, we wouldn't be us without our kids. Polite applause rippled through the banquet hall. I sat near the back, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in my lap. I'd chosen that seat intentionally, less visible, less exposed. My father leaned toward the mic, grinning, especially our youngest. A few people chuckled. They knew the rhythm of this, the joke before the joke. She's still finding herself, my mother added lightly, living at home, exploring options. Exploring options. That was her favorite phrase. It sounded kinder than unemployed, softer than unsuccessful, more palatable than the truth she preferred not to acknowledge. Someone at a nearby table laughed and said, "Must be nice." My mother laughed along. Oh, it is, for her. Free room, free food, no responsibilities. We joke that she's our longest-running tenant. More laughter. I felt my jaw tighten, but my face stayed calm. Years of practice had taught me how to keep my reactions small. And you know, my father added, raising his glass, we tease her about being a freeloader, but hey, family's family. That one got a bigger laugh. Freeloader. The word echoed in my head, sharp and humiliating. I glanced around the room. Some people looked uncomfortable. Most looked amused. A few nodded knowingly, like this confirmed something they'd always assumed about me. No one asked questions. No one ever did. If you'd asked anyone there who I was, they would have told you a very specific story, that I'd moved back home after college and never quite left, that I was creative, that I bounced between ideas, that my parents were saints for putting up with me. It was a clean story, a convenient one, and my parents told it well. What they never mentioned was that I paid the property taxes, that I covered half the utilities, that I'd quietly taken over the mortgage payments when my father's hours were cut 2 years earlier. They never mentioned the late nights I spent managing the rental accounts, or the repairs I paid for out of pocket, or the business I ran from the converted garage that kept the house afloat. They never mentioned any of that, because that version of me didn't fit the joke. My mother continued her speech, basking in the attention. 40 years of marriage teaches you a lot. Patience, sacrifice, and how to love your kids even when they take a little longer to launch. More laughter. I swallowed. This wasn't new. They'd always framed me like this.
At holidays, at church, at neighborhood gatherings, I was the punchline that made them look generous. And I'd let it happen, because correcting them would have meant embarrassing them, because explaining myself would have sounded defensive, because I'd been raised to believe that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. But something about hearing that word, freeloader, said so casually, so confidently in front of all these people, it snapped something into focus. Not anger, clarity. When the applause finally faded, the host announced it was time for gifts. My parents waved it off modestly. "Oh, we told everyone no gifts," my mother said. "Just your presence is enough." That part was true. Mostly. I stood up then. Not dramatically, not hurriedly, just deliberately. The room quieted slightly as people noticed movement. "I actually did bring something," I said. My voice carried farther than I expected. My mother turned, surprised. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to." Her tone was indulgent, almost amused. I walked toward the front of the room holding a medium-sized box wrapped in simple navy paper. No bow, no flourish. "This is from me," I said, setting it on the table between them. My father chuckled. "You didn't have to spend money on us." A ripple of laughter followed. I met his eyes. "I didn't," I said. That got a few confused looks. My mother tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Just open it," I replied gently. The room leaned in. Not physically, emotionally. Curiosity has a sound when it spreads. My father peeled back the paper, still smiling. Until he wasn't. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a neatly organized folder. Tabs, documents, clean, professional. He flipped the first page. Then the second. His smile faded. My mother leaned over, frowning. "What is that?" My father didn't answer. The room grew very quiet. "What is it?" my mother repeated, sharper this time. I took a breath. "It's the payment history," I said calmly, "for the house."
Her face drained of color. "What?" she whispered. "The mortgage, the utilities, the repairs, the taxes," I continued. "Everything I've been covering for the last 2 years." My father looked up at me, eyes wide. That's not," he started. "The bank statements are behind the summary," I said. "You'll see the transfers from my account." A murmur rippled through the room. Not laughter this time. Whispers. My mother's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. I watched her realization unfold in real time. The jokes, the narrative, the story she'd told so confidently. Cracking. "You said," she began, then stopped. I finished the thought for her. "You said I was freeloading." Silence. The kind that presses on your ears. Someone near the front cleared their throat. My father stood abruptly. "We should talk about this privately." I shook my head gently. "You didn't make it private when you called me a freeloader." His mouth opened, closed. I wasn't angry. That was the part that surprised me most. I felt steady. "I didn't bring this to embarrass you," I said, addressing the room now. "I brought it because I'm done being misrepresented." My mother's voice shook. "Why would you do this now?" I met her gaze. "Because tonight you reminded me that silence has a cost." The room was frozen. People who had laughed minutes earlier now stared at the floor, at their hands, anywhere but at us. My father swallowed hard. "This isn't appropriate," he said weakly. "No," I agreed, "but it's accurate." I picked up my coat from the back of a chair. "I hope you enjoy your anniversary. Truly." Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard my mother say my name. Once. I didn't turn around. Because I knew something they didn't yet understand. That box wasn't the real gift. The real gift was what came next. And they were about to realize exactly how much the so-called freeloader had been holding together all along. I didn't hear what happened after I walked out. Not the gasps, not the whispers, not the hurried explanations my parents probably scrambled to offer. All I heard was the steady echo of my own footsteps down the hallway and the sharp intake of breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. I stood by my car for a moment, hands resting on the roof, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My face looked calm, almost detached, but my chest felt like it had been split open. Not because I'd finally told the truth, because I knew the truth would demand consequences, and I was done protecting everyone from them. My phone buzzed before I even started the engine. "Mom." I silenced it. Then Dad. Silenced. Then my aunt, my cousin, a neighbor. Silenced. For the first time in my life, I wasn't available for immediate emotional cleanup. I drove. Not home. Not yet. I pulled into a quiet grocery store parking lot a few blocks away and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. I hadn't planned what came after the gift box. I'd only planned the truth, and now the truth was loose. When I finally went home, the house felt different. Not physically, energetically, like the walls had been listening for years and had finally exhaled. I dropped my coat on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and walked into the kitchen. The overhead light flickered slightly, same as always. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. Everything was still there. The payments, the transfers, the quiet evidence of my contribution. I clicked into the automatic payment section. Mortgage payment scheduled, active. Utility transfers, active. Property tax escrow contribution, active. I hovered my cursor over the first one and stopped. Not yet, I told myself, but soon. My parents didn't come home that night. I didn't know where they went, and for once, I didn't feel responsible for filling in the gaps. I slept deeply, the kind of sleep you only get when you stop bracing for impact. The next morning, my mother confronted me in the kitchen. Her eyes were swollen, her voice tight. "How could you humiliate us like that?" she demanded. No good morning, no pause. I poured myself coffee calmly. "You humiliated me first. That was a joke. You know how people are." "Yes," I said evenly. "I know how people laugh when someone else is the punchline."
She folded her arms. "You could have talked to us." I met her gaze. "I tried. You brushed it off. Every time." My father stood silently near the doorway, jaw clenched. "You had no right to air our finances like that," he said. I took a slow sip of coffee. "I didn't air your finances," I replied. "I clarified mine." Silence. Then my mother said the sentence I'd heard my whole life, just dressed differently. "You didn't have to do all that." I set my mug down. "And you didn't have to call me a freeloader," I said. "But here we are." The shift happened gradually over the next few days. Not apologies, awareness. They started speaking to me more carefully, watching their words, measuring their tone. Not out of respect, out of fear. Because for the first time, they realized something important. They didn't actually know how much I controlled, and that unsettled them. My aunt called again. "I had no idea," she admitted. "None of us did." "I know," I said. "They're embarrassed." I exhaled slowly. "They should be." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" I considered the question. "Yes," I said. "I think I finally am." That weekend, my father asked to talk, just the two of us. We sat at the dining table where I'd balanced spreadsheets late into the night for years, quietly making sure the house stayed afloat. "He never realized how much pressure you were under," he said. "That's because you never asked," I replied. He nodded. "We didn't mean to take advantage of you." "But you did," I said gently. Another nod. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. I leaned back in my chair. "You start by telling the truth, to people, about me." He looked uncomfortable. "That won't be easy." I smiled faintly. "Neither was being your safety net while being called a burden." He flinched. That night, I made the decision I'd been circling for years. I canceled the automatic payments. All of them. Not out of anger, out of alignment. I left a printed summary on the counter. Clear. Professional, respectful. A 30-day notice. Enough time to adjust. Not enough time to manipulate. My mother cried when she found it. "You're abandoning us," she said. I shook my head. "I'm stepping out of a role you assigned me without consent." My father didn't argue. He just looked tired. Word spread. Fast. The story changed. Suddenly, I wasn't the freeloader. I was the one who'd been quietly holding everything together. Some people apologized. Some avoided me.
A few tried to rewrite history. I let them. I didn't need their version anymore. What surprised me most wasn't the backlash, it was the relief. My shoulders relaxed, my thoughts slowed, my resentment dissolved into clarity. I wasn't angry at my parents anymore. I was finished negotiating my worth. A week later, my mother knocked on my door. Not to accuse, not to cry, to ask, "Can we talk about what happens next?" she said quietly. I studied her face, really looked. For the first time, I didn't see authority. I saw consequence. "Yes," I said, "but it's going to be different now." She nodded, and for the first time in my life, she listened. But what they still didn't understand, what no one in that room understood yet, was that the gift box wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because once people stop mistaking your silence for weakness, they have to confront everything they've built on it. And the next decision I was about to make
Would change this family forever. The house felt smaller after that. Not physically, emotionally. Every room carried a new tension, like the walls were waiting to see who would blink first. My parents started whispering when they thought I wasn't around. Conversations stopped abruptly when I entered the kitchen. My mother rearranged cabinets that didn't need rearranging. My father stayed out later than usual, claiming errands that didn't add up. They were recalibrating, trying to figure out how to exist in a reality where I wasn't quietly absorbing the weight anymore. And for the first time, I wasn't rushing to make it easier for them. 30 days sounds generous on paper. In real life, it feels like a countdown. Every week, my parents grew more anxious. Bills arrived, phone calls came in. My father spent hours on hold with the bank. My mother complained loudly about grocery prices, utilities, gas, things she'd never noticed before because she'd never had to. Not once did they thank me for the years I'd covered it all, but they stopped calling me a freeloader. That word disappeared completely. It was replaced with something else: caution. One evening, my father sat down across from me with a legal pad. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Maybe we should formalize things." I raised an eyebrow. "Formalize what?" "Our arrangement. You know, contributions, expectations." I almost laughed. For years, there had been no arrangement, just assumption. "I'm not interested in a new arrangement," I said calmly. He frowned. "Then what are you interested in?" I met his eyes. "Moving out." The words hung between us. My mother, who'd been pretending not to listen from the sink, froze. "Moving out?" she repeated sharply. "You can't just decide that." I tilted my head. "Why not?" "Because this is your home," she said. "Because family doesn't call each other freeloaders," I finished quietly. She flinched. "I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing it because staying here keeps me stuck in a role that no longer exists." My father rubbed his temples. "This is happening too fast." "No," I said gently. "It's been happening for years. You're just noticing now." That night, I started packing, not dramatically, not all at once, just intentionally. Boxes labeled clearly, items sorted thoughtfully. Each box felt like a boundary made physical. I found things I'd forgotten: old notebooks, photos, letters I'd written but never sent. In one box, I found an envelope addressed to myself, dated 4 years ago. Inside was a list I'd written during a particularly hard night. Things I do for this family that no one sees. It was longer than I remembered. I sat on the floor and cried. Not because I was sad, because I finally let myself feel proud. The extended family reacted exactly as expected. Some tried to intervene. "Just talk it out. Your parents mean well. You don't want to regret this." Others stayed quiet, uncomfortable now that the truth had cracked open. A few reached out privately. "I always wondered," one cousin admitted, "how they kept things running." I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. 2 weeks before my move-out date, my mother tried one last approach. She cooked my favorite meal. set the table nicely, lit candles. It felt like a negotiation disguised as nostalgia. "We've been thinking," she said carefully, passing the dish. "Maybe we could tell people the truth about how much you've helped." I looked at her. "Why?" she replied. "This isn't about how things look, it's about how they were." She sighed. "I don't understand why you're doing this." I set my fork down. "Because I don't want to spend my life proving I'm a burden." Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't rush to comfort her. That was another pattern I was done with. Moving day came quietly. No scene, no shouting, just boxes and a rented truck. My father helped carry things out. He didn't complain, didn't lecture, didn't joke. At the end, he stood in the driveway, hands on his hips. "I wish we'd done better," he said. I nodded. Me too. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. My new place was small, but it was mine. The first night I sat on the floor with takeout, surrounded by boxes, and laughed out loud for no reason at all. The silence felt different here. Not heavy, open. 3 weeks later, my mother hosted another gathering, smaller this time. And something interesting happened. When someone asked where I was, she said, "She moved out. She's doing really well." No joke, no qualifier, no punchline. I heard about it from my aunt, and for the first time, I believed things might actually change, not because I'd explained myself, but because I'd removed myself from the role that made explanation unnecessary. Then came the call, from my father. "We're selling the house," he said quietly. I wasn't surprised. The math had finally caught up. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he added. "I appreciate that," I replied. A pause. "You were never a freeloader," he said. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, but it was true, and that mattered. Later that night, I opened the gift box file on my laptop. The same documents, the same numbers, but this time I didn't need to prove anything. I closed the folder. I didn't need evidence anymore, because the story had shifted, and the person who benefited most from that shift was me. What my parents learned too late was this: when you reduce someone to a joke long enough, they eventually stop laughing, they stop explaining, they stop compensating, and when they finally open the box and show you the truth, they don't stay to help you put the illusion back together. And the next time we saw each other, nothing exploded, nothing imploded, but everything had changed because I was no longer living inside a story that required me to disappear for everyone else to feel comfortable. And that was the real anniversary gift. Life after moving out didn't unfold the way movies make it seem. There was no dramatic glow-up montage, no instant confidence, no overnight transformation where everything suddenly made sense. What there was instead was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you confront yourself without distraction. And that was harder than anything I'd faced in my parents' house. The first few weeks in my new place felt almost unreal. I'd wake up and instinctively listen for my mother's footsteps in the hallway, for my father's cough in the early morning, for the television murmuring in the background. But there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, my own breathing. At first, it felt lonely. Then it felt safe. And then, unexpectedly, it felt heavy, because without being needed, without being relied on, without constantly managing someone else's stability, I had to figure out who I was when no one was taking from me. I didn't realize how much of my identity had been built around being useful, the responsible one, the fixer, the quiet backbone. When that role disappeared, it left a hollow space. Not emptiness, but possibility. And possibility is terrifying when you've never been allowed to prioritize yourself. My parents adjusted slower than I did. The house sale dragged on longer than expected. The market wasn't kind. Repairs that had been postponed for years suddenly mattered, and without me quietly handling logistics, everything felt harder for them. They called more often, not to ask for money, not directly, but to ask questions.
How do you negotiate with contractors? What does this letter from the bank mean? Who do we talk to about refinancing options? The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't gloat. I answered selectively, not out of obligation, out of choice, and that distinction changed everything. One afternoon, my mother came by my apartment unexpectedly. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching her purse like she might bolt. "This place is nice," she said. It was small, clean, modest. Mine. "Thank you," I replied. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded, eyes scanning the room. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying," she said suddenly. I didn't respond right away. I'd learned that silence creates space for truth. "When you left," she continued, "everything felt messier, like something was missing." I met her gaze. That something was labor.
She winced. "I don't mean that cruelly," I added. "I mean it factually." She nodded slowly. "I see that now." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than we'd ever gotten. As weeks turned into months, something subtle shifted in how people spoke about me. Not just my parents, the extended family, the neighbors, the church friends who used to smile sympathetically when my parents joked about me still living at home. Now, when my name came up, the tone was different. Respectful, careful. They'd heard pieces of the truth, not from me, from the absence I left behind. Because when you stop doing invisible work, people don't immediately praise you. They struggle, and struggle has a way of revealing who was really holding things together. Still, not everyone took it well. One cousin pulled me aside at a family event and said, "Don't you think you took it too far?" I smiled politely. Too far from where? From expectation? From obligation? From the version of myself that made everyone else comfortable? She didn't have an answer. Most people didn't. The hardest moment came unexpectedly. My father had a minor health scare. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to shake everyone. My phone rang at 2 a.m. For a split second, muscle memory kicked in. I almost jumped into caretaker mode automatically. Then I paused. I listened, and I asked myself a question I'd never been allowed to ask before. What do I actually want to do? I went to the hospital, but I didn't manage everything. I didn't coordinate calls. I didn't handle paperwork. I didn't smooth emotions. I sat by his bed. I held his hand. I left when I felt myself getting overwhelmed. And for the first time, that was enough. Later, my mother thanked me, not for fixing anything, just for showing up. It felt strange and oddly healing. As my parents learned to function without leaning on me financially or logistically, they also started seeing me differently. They stopped offering unsolicited advice, stopped commenting on my choices, stopped framing my life as unfinished. One evening, my father said something that stunned me. "You seem lighter," he said. I laughed softly. "So do you." He nodded. I guess we were all holding on to something that wasn't working anymore. It was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from him. But healing isn't linear. Just when things felt steady, a new complication emerged. The buyer for my parents' house backed out. The finances tightened again, and the old patterns hovered just beneath the surface. I could feel it, in the way my mother's voice grew cautious on the phone, in the way my father hesitated before asking certain questions. They hadn't asked for help, but they were circling the idea, and I knew a test was coming. Not because they were malicious, but because habits don't disappear overnight. At the same time, my own life was expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant drain, my business flourished. New opportunities emerged. Projects I'd delayed for years suddenly felt possible. I started saying yes to things I'd always postponed: travel, collaboration, rest. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was choosing. One evening, sorting through emails, I found an old draft I'd never sent, a message to my parents, written years earlier, explaining everything I did for the house. I read it slowly, then deleted it. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The truth had already done its work. But not everyone was ready to accept the new version of me. At a family dinner, someone joked, "Careful, she might invoice us." The table laughed nervously. I didn't. I looked at them calmly and said, "I don't work for free anymore." The laughter died instantly, and something clicked. Boundaries don't require anger, they require consistency. A few days later, my mother called. Her voice was tight. "We might need to ask you something," she said. I closed my eyes. Here it was. "Before you do," I replied, "we need to be very clear about what kind of relationship we're having now." Silence. "Go on," she said. "I can be your daughter," I continued. "I can be supportive emotionally. I can show up when I choose, but I won't be your financial backup plan." Another pause. "I understand," she said quietly. I wasn't sure she fully did, but it was a start. That night, I lay awake thinking about the gift box, how one moment of truth had unraveled years of quiet exploitation, how exposing facts had done what countless conversations never could. But I also realized something deeper. The box wasn't powerful because of what was inside it. It was powerful because of what I was finally willing to risk. Discomfort, judgment, distance, all for the sake of honesty. The next chapter wasn't about confrontation, it was about endurance, about whether my parents could truly respect a version of me that no longer centered their needs, about whether I could maintain boundaries when guilt resurfaced. Because change doesn't announce itself loudly, it whispers and waits to see if you'll hold your ground. And as the pressure began to build again, I knew the hardest test wasn't behind me yet. It was coming, and it would force all of us to decide whether this shift was real or just temporary restraint before old patterns returned. The request didn't come the way I expected. There was no frantic phone call, no tearful voicemail, no dramatic confession of failure. It came quietly on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of an email from my father. Short, careful, measured. "We're meeting with the bank again on Friday. They've asked if we have any family willing to co-sign or temporarily assist. We said we needed time to think. We wanted to ask how you feel about that." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it perfectly. This wasn't desperation yet. This was testing the water, seeing if the old door was still unlocked. I didn't respond right away. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The air was crisp, the sky clear, the kind of afternoon that once would have made me feel guilty for enjoying anything while someone else struggled. That feeling flickered, then passed, because something had changed inside me. For the first time, I wasn't deciding out of fear of fallout. I was deciding based on alignment. I thought back to the anniversary night, the laughter, the word freeloader, the way my mother smiled as she said it. I thought about all the dinners I'd paid for, the repairs I'd handled, the stress I'd absorbed quietly so no one else had to. And I thought about the version of me who would have immediately replied, "Of course, I'll figure something out." That version of me didn't exist anymore. When I got home, I wrote my response. Not emotionally, not defensively, honestly. "I care about you. I want you to be okay, but I'm not willing to co-sign, loan, or financially support the house or any related debt. I'm happy to talk about emotional support, planning, or resources, but not money." I read it once, then hit send. My hands didn't shake. The silence afterward lasted longer than I expected. 3 days, then 5. I wondered if this was it, if this was the moment where things finally broke beyond repair. And to my surprise, I was okay with that possibility, because peace that depends on self-erasure isn't peace, it's compliance. On Sunday evening, my mother called. Her voice sounded steadier than I expected. "We talked about it," she said. "Your father and I." I waited. "We're not angry," she continued. "We're disappointed, but we understand." That word landed carefully. Understand. Not agree, not approve, but understand. "And?" I asked. "And we're figuring it out," she said. "On our own." I exhaled slowly. "I'm proud of you for that," I said, honestly. There was a pause. "You shouldn't have had to do all of this just to be seen," she said quietly. Something in my chest loosened, not healed completely, but acknowledged. The house sold a month later, not for what they'd hoped, but enough. They moved into a small townhouse across town, simpler, cheaper, manageable. My father picked up part-time consulting work. My mother took a job she actually enjoyed. Life didn't collapse, it adjusted. And that, more than anything, confirmed what I'd suspected all along. They were never incapable, they were just comfortable relying on me. The next family gathering was different. No jokes at my expense, no sideways comments, no pitying looks. When someone asked what I was up to, my mother said, "She's running her own business. She's doing really well." No qualifiers, no laughter, just fact. I met her eyes across the room. She smiled, not performatively, genuinely. Later that evening, my father handed me a small box. "This is for you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Just open it," he replied. Inside was a single document, a handwritten letter, from him. He wrote about the pressure he'd felt to appear successful, about the fear of aging, about how easy it was to let my quiet competence become invisible. He didn't excuse it, he owned it. At the bottom, he wrote, "You were never a freeloader. You were our foundation, and we should have said that sooner." I folded the letter carefully. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. That night, driving home, I realized something profound. Closure doesn't come when people finally say the perfect words. It comes when their behavior changes enough that you don't need the words anymore. I still see my parents.
We're not overly close, but we're honest. They don't lean on me the way they used to. I don't resent them the way I once did. We meet as adults now, not roles, not obligations, just people. As for me, I stopped shrinking my accomplishments, stopped cushioning my success, stopped apologizing for stability. I learned that generosity feels different when it's chosen rather than expected. I learned that silence can protect others or erase you. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is open the box, tell the truth, and walk away without putting everything back the way it was. People still ask about that night, the anniversary, the gift, the fallout. They expect a dramatic answer. I give them a simple one. I stopped pretending. That's all it took. Because once the illusion was gone, everything else followed. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but honestly. And that honesty, it gave me a life where I'm no longer the punchline, no longer the backup plan, no longer the quiet safety net no one acknowledges. I'm just a woman who knows her worth and refuses to let it be rewritten for someone else's comfort ever again.